Things continue to go from bad to worse for the Philadelphia 76ers as Tyrese Maxey is the latest name added to an already lengthy injury report and providing more doubt for the Sixers' outlook. I want to break down what we know regarding Tyrese Maxey, how this impacts the rest of the team, and why we may have to adjust a little bit of our expectations for this Sixers team due to these injuries. So let's jump into what we know. We got this update from Shams Charania of The Athletic, who said just in Philadelphia 76ers All-Star Tyrese Maxey is expected to miss a couple weeks because of a right hamstring injuries, sources tell ESPN. Full evaluation coming later Thursday. Both sides are bracing for Maxey's absence. Sixers will take a careful approach with the injury. So obviously not something that you want to see, and here's a little bit of a look of him leaving the floor last night. This was sustained in the third quarter of that game, and Maxey did not check into the game. It did turn out to be a bit of a blowout, so there was no reason to push him, and it did seem like this was going to be a non-issue. That when you look at what Nick Nurse was saying post-game, and shout out to Sixers Adam, who did travel all the way out there to Los Angeles for this matchup here. And speaking of Nurse after the game, he said, quote, "I don't think he will miss time. I don't have any idea at this point, but again, just precautionary, really precautionary. That type of game, there was not much of a reason to try him push through." So this is just example 1,000,005 of the Sixers not exactly being clear or at least on top of things with the situation. So to jump into what went wrong last night, the Clippers ultimately producing a 110-98 victory, a game that I would say the score is closer than the game actually felt. Things really fell apart in that third quarter where I believe the Sixers were outscored 37-16, is I believe what that number says in the top there. And for Maxey specifically, that in the matchup, he had 12 points, was limited to just 32 minutes, which is still a lot for him. And I did want to specifically mention when kind of diving into how this injury could have occurred, let's acknowledge that as of today, this coming right now at recording, Tyrese Maxey is leading the NBA in minutes played per game at 44.5. The last player to average that many minutes over a full season was Luol Deng in the 2012 and 2013 season. Almost certainly won't last over the course of the entire season, but is still impressive and still too much for a guy who is now walking just like this off the floor. So I understand the Sixers have been put in a really difficult spot here. That we know the Joel Embiid situation. We've talked plenty about that, and it does seem like he is finally set to return on Tuesday. Obviously, Paul George getting injured was not a part of the plan, but the Sixers have to find a way to stay afloat, and so much has been thrown on Tyrese Maxey's plate. Now, from the overall perspective here, what I expect is we don't see Tyrese Maxey for a couple weeks now. He is still young. He's not a guy that I expect this to linger, but there's something you have to make sure that it is the case. That hamstrings are tricky. They can be the type of injury that sticks with a guy. And for Tyrese Maxey specifically, whose game is so predicated on change of direction, change of pace, getting downhill, his top-end sprint speed, that's an important muscle that you have to make sure gets back to 100%. So they should be handling this with the careful mindset in mind, making sure that you're not forcing him back on the floor too soon, but that doesn't exactly increase the Sixers' outlook to win from here. So when looking at how this team currently sits, do want to pull up the NBA standings here, and we can see that the Sixers dead last in the Eastern Conference with their 1-6 record, tied with the Milwaukee Bucks, which is not what I think anyone would have predicted at this point in the season. But I guess if I want to paint somewhat of an optimistic lens here, at least when you're comparing the Sixers to the Bucks, like the Sixers very clearly have injuries to point to for the reason for why they're not where they desire to be. That is not quite the case in Milwaukee. I know Giannis has missed a game, and I know Damian Lillard, battling things as is always the case for any player. But the reality is they just straight up have not been good enough on the basketball floor. For the Sixers, we at least can keep that pipe dream of hope that when this team is fully constructed, that they do have a puncher's chance at being the contenders they desire to be. Now, this also presents a challenge that you have to make sure that you are able to stay in that playoff mix while battling these injuries. For the short term, we're talking about Paul George, who still is not fully off his minutes limit, being the only of the three stars with Tyrese Maxey, with Joel Embiid, and with Paul George. And I guess what is really frightening, what the sense that is starting to kick in for me from a concern, is it is running a little bit of a parallel to that Brooklyn Nets super team, who, of course, with James Harden, with Kevin Durant, and with Kyrie Irving, basically never played together. That they went through the season basically alternating who is going to be there, staying afloat, never were able to build that chemistry. And for what it's worth, it's pretty insane to compare this trio to that trio based on what each of them have done in their careers compared to what this trio has done. The Tyrese Maxey, as much as I love him, as great as I believe he is going to grow to be as a basketball player, it is unfair to compare him to any of Kyrie Irving, James Harden, or Kevin Durant. Even Joel Embiid, who I would say is the most, well, obviously the top end best player out of the three of them, does not have quite the same accomplishments. And by the way, searching back to all of this, it didn't work for the Nets. They had to break it up. And I know if Kevin Durant has one size smaller feet, that they're probably beating the Bucks, and that's called a 3 instead of a 2. We can go down the revisionist history for it. But the point being that this did not work for those caliber of superstars, and now we're asking it to work for this caliber of superstars, which I don't think is the best optimistic lens or most realistic outlook to have at this point. But the cards are dealt as they are, and the Sixers have to react to the situation. So what can they do from here? Well, let's take a quick peek at the depth chart. And as you can see, looking through that starting five, which is when they will be fully constructed, being Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre Jr., Paul George, Caleb Martin, and Joel Embiid. So the big three there, with Tyrese Maxey obviously set to miss for the foreseeable future. Joel Embiid now serving his suspension. Game 1 of that was last night. So 2 more games that he will miss. He is set to return on Tuesday against the New York Knicks for the NBA Cup there. Paul George is a guy that we're going to have to see what exactly he can bring to the table. That he's going on Soto, but he's going to have to make up for Tyrese Maxey's overall production, which so far this season has been 27.6 points per game, 3.9 assists, 3 rebounds. And when I ask about the Maxey lack of production, look no farther than the shooting splits. That just 40.6% from the field, 28.6% from 3. I am incredibly confident that I think that will further grow as there is a larger sample size throughout the season. But the point being, has not quite been good enough there. Now, when looking at options to overcome this, I'm going to start by bringing up Caleb Martin. Yikes, fellas. This is not exactly what you hope to be. A guy who's shooting 20% from beyond the three-point line to start, and it does look like there's a bit of a hitch in the jump shot. He's kicking his legs in a weird way. I understand Caleb Martin has always had a little bit of a unique three-point shot. I'm going to do a deeper dive video when we have a little bit more to go off, and I do expect his role to grow now that Maxey's injured. So I'm kind of waiting to see that to be the case. Tomorrow against the Lakers will probably be after that I dive into things a little bit. But my level of concern for Caleb Martin has almost certainly increased through the start of the season. And I think even taking the hitch in the shot and all those concerns out of it, what I think the reality is he's not quite a guy that can scale up and roll the way that you expect. I'm still pretty confident that when this team is fully overall constructed, that he's going to be effective in a fourth or fifth starter type role. He's a guy who's still doing a lot of the little things really well, making the right decision with the ball, making smart cuts, defending hard. I still am overall satisfied with the version of Caleb Martin that we've seen. But what I do think is fair to assess is he might not quite be this guy that can step up into the role the way that you would hope. So who can in this case? Well, I'm calling for Jared McCain to at least get an opportunity. Is McCain perfect? Absolutely not. Is this a bigger role than he probably should be stepping into? Sure. But what are your other options right now? This Sixers team is so desperate for offense, and I do think McCain is at least a guy who can dribble the basketball, is nonstop motion on the floor, willing to let it fly from 3, and that is a guy that in this absence without Tyrese Maxey, I want to see have every opportunity to prove what he can do on an NBA floor. Now, do I expect that to change the outlook or equate to wins on a regular basis? Probably not as much as I would hope to be the case, but I do think that there are no better options on roster. A guy like Reggie Jackson, do you want to kick the tires, see if he's got something left on the tank? I have not seen much of him this year. I will say I haven't loved the opportunities that we have seen, that it does feel like he's a little bit past, the best version of Reggie Jackson for certainty. It's going to be ugly for this next couple of stretch. So Joel Embiid coming back does change things a great bit. And if he is able to play on a regular basis, a night-to-night basis, which I think feels a bit optimistic at this point, we'll have a clearer idea once he actually steps foot on the floor. But that is a guy that you can carry 2 wins on an every-night basis. We've seen that throughout Embiid's career. But that's a lot on his plate. It isn't great. There's no way to sugarcoat this, that Tyrese Maxey getting hurt can pave the way to staying on track here. I think the reality is that we should address is the play-in is now a realistic expectation. That I think throughout the season and throughout to this point, I said no matter what, they're still going to end up a top 6 seed. Well, I think I got to walk that one back a little bit. That if Tyrese Maxey is out for the next couple weeks, if Paul George is not ready to carry this team or is not fully off the minutes limit or whatever you want to phrase the case here, and Joel Embiid, who knows what's going on at this point, there's going to be a lot more losses than I think we should hope to be the case. So for now, let's buckle up. Speedy recovery to Tyrese Maxey. Sending prayers that way. But it's about as bad of a start to the season you could possibly hope for this Sixers team. I don't think you could script a worse start to the season. Let's just think about this real quick. That so far this year, they're 1-6 on the floor. Joel Embiid has not played a game, has been suspended, and there's been 2 NBA investigations. Paul George was hurt in preseason and has just made his debut. They're 0-2 in the games that he's played. Tyrese Maxey has taken a step back statistically and now is likely to miss the longest extended period of his career thus far. I know he did break his foot as well and did miss about a month. during, I think, 2 seasons ago. So another example there, but should be in that ballpark. The reality is it's been all bad for the Sixers team. I guess to leave on a bit of a high note, hopefully only up from here, but I do think it's going to get better it's going to get worse before it gets better for the next couple weeks. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Send some good vibes to Tyrese Maxey below. We'd love to hear from you guys. Make sure you're smashing that subscribe button and dropping a like if you haven't. And regardless of how dark it gets, I'm going to be right here kicking out videos and talking through it with you guys right here on Sixers Digest. So I want as many of you along for the ride as possible. Also, we'll be hanging out later tonight with my guy, Jacob Moreno, doing a live stream, kind of talking through things. So make sure to tap in from that. 6:30 we're going live, so be ready for that. And I'll be talking with you next time right here on Sixers Digest. Peace.